The victors write history. I'm sure you've heard this phrase before. But I might make it a little more specific. What we really mean is that the group of people who overpower, subdue, capture, or kill another group of people are usually the ones who get to dictate the official story about what happened. And that story usually serves to justify and then codify the power of the victors. We're seeing it today. Across the country, people in power are doing all they can to purge the brutal story of genocide of indigenous people here in these United States. The cruel story of slavery in these United States, and all the ways those legacies have shaped who we are as a country today. 150 years ago, the story was that indigenous people were uncivilized savages to justify their eradication. Our original Constitution dictated that each person who was enslaved counted as 3/5 of a person when it came to congressional representation. People in power shape the narrative to preserve power. The story told becomes the truth, even if it's not necessarily fact. I think this is why many of us think that Mary Magdalene was a sex worker, which is not stated in any sort of way in our scriptures, or even in some of the non-canonical scriptures, like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary, where she's mentioned. A lot of us think that Mary Magdalene was a sex worker because in the 6th century, Pope Gregory I said she was in an Easter sermon. That's because he was conflating Mary Magdalene with the quote-unquote sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet. And the story took off. Mary Magdalene became this alluring, beautiful woman who was either maybe a little too close to Jesus or who submitted to Jesus, trading in her sinful life to become a dedicated follower. I can't get inside the head of a 6th century pope. But I do know that the early church wasn't exactly comfortable with women in leadership. In fact, up until fairly recently, well, it's still going on. The church has tended to slot women into 3 different categories. The nurturing mother, exemplified by Mary, the mother of Jesus. The promiscuous woman, exemplified by Mary Magdalene, or the mystics like Julian of Norwich or Joan of Arc, who are often characterized as hysterical, deeply faithful, but not very sound of mind, too emotional. But no woman is just a mother or a sex object. Not every woman's faith is expressed purely emotionally. But when women have defied these categories, as Mary Magdalene did, the storytellers, the writers of history like Pope Gregory I, slotted them into those categories anyhow. But I prefer Mary Magdalene as she appears in the scriptures. The Mary Magdalene that, as I mentioned, theologian Nadia Bolz-Weber describes as the patron saint of just showing up. That's what Mary Magdalene does throughout the Gospels. She shows up for herself, for her community, for her friends, and for her Savior. She's all over the 4 Gospels. But chronologically, she's mentioned first as having been healed of 7 demons. I don't ever really know what that means. But what we can deduce is that she was sick in some way, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We don't know. But she sought help for herself. She sought healing for herself, advocated for what she needed, and she got it. Because she asked for healing, and because she received that healing, she was able to show up in an even bigger way. She was able to show up for a community she had now come to believe in. We're told in Luke that Mary Magdalene, along with several other women, provided financial support for Jesus' ministry. Yes, even Jesus needed pledges to do the work. And because Mary Magdalene ended up in Jerusalem when Jesus was crucified, the implication is that she started following Jesus through his ministry. She became a disciple, we might say, even if she's not officially counted among the 12. And speaking of crucifixion, guess who was at the foot of the cross as Jesus was dying? Not Peter, who had betrayed Jesus 3 times that very same day. No, it was Mary Magdalene, along with the other women who loved and followed Jesus. At the height of his suffering, Mary Magdalene showed up. Even though there was nothing she could do but just sit there and be present, she just sat with Jesus in his suffering. Then, in the depth of her sorrow and grief and devastation, she showed up again. This time at the tomb of Jesus. She arrived before dawn, perhaps to tend to his body, perhaps to just say one last goodbye. And she found that the stone had been rolled away. When she saw his body wasn't there, she ran to get Peter and another disciple. And while those 2 disciples were in the tomb looking for Jesus, guess who appeared to Mary Magdalene while she waited outside? The risen Jesus chose Mary Magdalene to be the first witness to the resurrection. He sees her and he calls her by name. And showing up over and over and over again, Mary Magdalene became the messenger of resurrection, the apostle to the apostles, the midwife to a new way of believing, a new way of being, the disciple that our church relegated to the background. I think sometimes, like our psalm said this morning, we wonder where God has gone when we have found ourselves in the depths of suffering, in the midst of what seems to be unbearable pain. Maybe I should speak for myself. I know my prayer in those moments is often, God, where the hell are you? In those moments, I sometimes forget that God doesn't show up by swooping in and by making all the problems disappear. God shows up through the people who show up, through the Mary Magdalenes of the world who lend a hand when you are struggling, who bring food or give rides, or who simply sit with me or you when we're devastated, not looking away from the suffering, but bearing witness to it. helping us to know that we're not alone. People who show each of us our own strength in those moments and gently call us to advocate for our own needs, our own healing. That is the legacy of St. Mary Magdalene. She shows us how to show up for each other, how to be the body of Christ for one another. She helps us to know that God is all around us, even in our darkest moments, a messenger of resurrection. Amen.